So how I would categorize a drum influence, I guess it's anyone that I've heard. It's almost like when you hear a song and you think, I need to know who that drummer was. For whatever reason, it might have just been a particularly good groove or an amazing fill or whatever, and you don't know the band and you think, I must find out who played the drums. Or even if you do know the band, but you've never thought about the drummer before. And it's been a case of, right, I want to find out who played that and I want to listen to more stuff by them. So I think my earliest recognition of drummers came sometime after I was, albeit very basically, playing the drums. Apparently before I could walk, I would hit pots and pans, upended pots and pans with wooden spoons, sitting on the floor in the kitchen with a towel over my head. I don't know why, but I always had a towel over my head. And then for years after, when I actually started drumming and started gigging, I would always wear a cap. And I don't know what it was about having my head covered in some way. So that's how it started. But I think recognizing actual drummers and thinking, oh, that person is a drummer I want to know more about. That probably started with my overall musical influences. So because I had an older brother, because he was older, he was of course infinitely cooler than me. He listened to heavy metal, so I listened to heavy metal. And it really started with Iron Maiden and with Nicko McBrain. And even when I became aware that Clive Burr had played the drums on the first few albums, it was always Nicko was the person I thought of as the drummer. And although I actually enjoyed more, less, equally at least, playing the stuff that Clive Burr had done, it was always because Nicko had the charisma and he had the movement and he looked good doing it. And that was a real draw for me. It's like he's not just sitting at the back playing a backbeat. He's not just sitting at the back and occasionally coming out with great stuff. It's like he's completely hidden by the drum kit because he's got a massive drum kit, right? And you cannot see him from the audience at a gig. And he's still giving it everything behind the kit. So when you see concert footage and stuff like that, or nowadays, of course, you have big screens showing different angles for the audience. And you can see him doing it now. But he just always did that. He didn't care. He was drumming for the fun of it. And I think that his movements and the stuff that drew me towards him as a drummer were expressions of the fun he was having. When did I start to consider myself a drummer? I don't know. I guess I always thought that drumming, or at least hitting things, was something I enjoyed doing. Possibly when I first got my first drum kit, actually. That was when I was about 13, I think. And there was a music shop opened in the town that I grew up, and we'd never had a music shop before. And they not only sold drum kits, but one of the guys that ran it, a guy called Terry Maybe, which is a fantastic name, he was a drummer himself and started offering drumming lessons. And my mum spotted it and signed me up for it because she knew that I'd always loved doing it, and I'd certainly punished her eardrums enough on the pots and pans. And so it was probably when I started taking drumming lessons, and then as soon as it was clear that not only was it something I was very interested in doing, but also Terry sort of said it would be worth him getting a kit to practice on at home. That was when my parents kind of said, okay, can we come to an arrangement with, getting it and paying monthly or something like that? So, because drum kits aren't cheap, even the cheap drum kits back then, we were talking about 300 quid investment over 30 years ago. And so he really helped out, and he was probably the person that made me feel like a drummer by encouraging me and teaching me and getting me behind an actual drum kit. So in terms of the kit, and in terms of the influence that my drumming heroes have had on my kit, on the setup, on the brand, setup has always been a thing. When I see a drummer that I particularly admire, I will have a look at how they've got their kit set up, and I will try and copy that. And that has led to me having some really weird configurations through the years. So with the snare drum, for example, Nico has quite a slanted snare drum, slanted towards him, so the face is open towards him. If you look at people like Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, people like that, the snare was slanted away from them, and it was almost sort of going over it to play it. Again, with Nico, the ride cymbal's almost vertical on the right-hand side. So I did that for a long time. And then when I started listening to Faith No More, and Mike Bordin, the drummer from Faith No More, has his toms almost flat. So again, it's almost reaching over the top to sort of play them, which very much suits the style of what he plays, because he's got some really cool influences from like African drumming and stuff like that. So I would set my kit up like that and then try and play an Iron Maiden song, and it didn't work out so well. But sure, even now, I was always kind of vanilla, middle of the road, 5-piece kit, snare, tom, floor tom. But now with this kit, I've got it set up where it's snare, tom, and then 2 lower toms down to the right, and I keep my ride cymbal there. And that again was because I saw a few drummers that I thought were really cool playing with that kind of setup. So these days it would be someone like Sami Kwapamaki from the Von Hertzen brothers, currently playing with the Von Hertzen brothers. He's a Finnish drummer, and he's just insanely good. He is the kind of drummer that I want to be when I grow up. And he has his kit set up like that, and it allows him to do certain things. And it was like, actually, yeah, I'm going to give that a go. And I've stuck with it since then. So it's a couple of years I've played with this formation, but you can have endless fun with it. It is the instrument for kids that haven't grown up yet. When you change the layout of the kit, it does mean you have to adopt a slightly different way of doing things, because so much of drumming is, and this is something that I've spoken to you about previously with some of the Ether City stuff. So much of drumming is in your muscles, it's in your memory, and it's kind of like getting 3/4 of the way through a song and trying to think about how it ends and forgetting how the ending actually goes and what you do at the ending, and just going, it'll be okay, my muscles will remember what to do. So when you change the kit, that can be a little bit difficult, but not for long, really, because as soon as you know sort of internally, without having to think about it, oh, right, the high tom's there, the middle tom's down there, then everything else follows. So even if it's a song that you learned years ago, because you've adapted the way that you play, the muscle memory still works.
Discuss.
Okay, so Neil Peart is somebody that was an absolute hero. I've often said that I always knew that I wanted to play the drums. It wasn't until I heard Neil Peart that I wanted to be a good drummer, because it was an absolute game changer. The first time I heard 2112 and some of the runs that he does around the kit in there, it just opened my mind to what was possible. So I hugely respect his opinion, and I would agree with his opinion. Copying one style is just aping somebody else. But if you can pick and choose from many different styles, which is something that he did, it's not like he joined Rush fully formed and played the Neil Peart way throughout his entire career. He went through some significant phases of change. So in the early 80s, he was massively influenced by Stuart Copeland and what Stuart Copeland was doing in the Police, because it was so different from anything else. And it was so good that even someone like of Neil Peart's stature could go, actually, I want to do something like that. And so a lot of the early 80s stuff, you can very clearly hear the influence of Stuart Copeland. And then late in the 90s, he started taking drumming lessons again from I think the story goes that he saw Steve Smith from Journey, and Steve's playing had improved immeasurably. And so Neil said to him, you know, what gives? That was absolutely outstanding. I've never heard you play like that before. And Steve Smith said, you got to go see this guy, Freddie Gruber. And so Neil took lessons with Freddie Gruber, which sounds almost ridiculous when you consider that one of the, you know, God knows how many times he won like Modern Drummer magazine, Drummer of the Year, and all of that sort of stuff, that he was still humble enough to recognize that lessons are still a useful thing. And so again, having influence, and yeah, he would have been influenced by Freddie's drumming, but Freddie would have been influenced by XYZ drummers, and then filtering all of that down and passing it. So it's bits from here and there, I think can make it does make you sound original. There are certainly examples I could give you in terms of some Aether City numbers where I have played a particular fill, and I'm not going to say it was a rip-off, but it was heavily influenced by somebody in particular. So in Bad Streets, there are a number of fills that are a very big tip of the hat to Neil Peart. In some of the stuff that we've been recording recently, some of the ways that I've been going around the kit have been strongly influenced by Will Calhoun from Living Colour, who's another amazing drummer with influences from all over the place, and the different styles that the man can play are incredible. So absolutely. And there was one that we did, which I think is going up on the YouTube channel, where I start with a riff that is very Ringo Starr. I think it's almost an exact copy of something he does in I'm the Walrus, because it when I first heard your demo of the song, it just seemed to fit it so nicely. So I kind of carried that on through some of the other playing in that song. But it's incredible. And I don't know, I'd be interested to know if other musicians, if guitarists do the same, if they do a particular lick and they think, well, that's a bit of Eddie Van Halen in there, or that's a bit of Dave Gilmour, and being able to mix and match, and to be in a pick and mix and say, I'm going to have a little bit of that and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And the hi-hat, I'm going to do a Purdy shuffle on the hi-hat, but I'm going to do some Mike Bordin on the kick drum, or I'm going to go around the kit like Nico. It's great fun. That's a really interesting question. So the first bit, how useful is it to compartmentalize drummers into, say, they're a rock drummer or they're a jazz drummer? I don't think that's useful at all. I kind of think why limit yourself in terms of I am a rock drummer or I am a jazz drummer, when you can have so much fun with other stuff? And so by the same token, why would you pigeonhole somebody else? Because apart from anything, we're never sure of the influence that we might have. So a couple of very different examples. Ginger Baker, who isn't on my list of influences in drumming, and I think that's more of a personal thing. I thought that the musicians that I admire have always had time for other people and always been humble and always had respect for other people. And it seems to me that was something that Ginger absolutely lacked, any kind of respect for other people, especially Jack Bruce. But he always said that he was a jazz drummer and he was just playing rock, but he was and jazz was serious. Rock was just, it's almost pathetic. And I kind of think, why pigeonhole yourself? Why hold one genre to be above another one? It's different. It's very different. And if you can do both, that's great. Don't say, oh, I'm only doing this because I have to. That's insane, because then when you see the knock-on influence that you can have as a drummer, great example is Clyde Stubblefield, who was one of the drummers for James Brown. I say one of the drummers because James Brown actually had two drummers on stage with him. He had Jabbo Starks and Clyde Stubblefield. And they were brilliant, and they played off each other. It was a bit like the Allman Brothers Band did the same. You had J-Mo Johnson and Butch Trucks, and they brought different things to the songs that were being played. But if you listen to something like the live version of Whipping Post from Fillmore East, it's incredible. But Clyde Stubblefield played funk for James Brown. And there was a particular song ended up being called Funky Drummer by James Brown. And it was a jam. It was a jam that they were recording, and James Brown was improvising some lyrics over the top. And he suddenly heard Clyde play this incredible beat on the drums. And he stops all the other musicians. He says, right, I'm going to count to 3. Everyone drop out and let's give the drummer some. And Clyde Stubblefield played a few bars of this beat. And albeit being a funk drummer, in those few bars, he basically invented hip hop. Because those few bars have been sampled so often, and you will recognize it. If anyone watching, you go into to YouTube or whatever, look up Funky Drummer, you will recognize that beat that Clyde Stubblefield just came up with in a jam that you have heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So was he a funk drummer? Was he a hip hop drummer? What's the point of putting him in a pigeonhole? So if all of the drummers were in a house and in different rooms according to how they played, and which room would I be in, or which other drummers would be in the room that I was in, I would want to go from room to room to room. I would want to pick their brains and ask them, how do you do that? What made you play that bit? Or is that something, was that an absolute part of the song from the beginning? Or is it something you just put in the studio as a last minute thing? Did it come from a jam? Did it come from serious thoughts? When you move your arms like that, how the bloody hell do you do that? How do you do double hand crossovers and crap like that so very easily? I don't think I'd belong in any room with any of them, because I don't think I'd be good enough to be in that room with them. But I would want to go from room to room and learn at their feet. Okay, so going back to who influenced my influences? Definitely, the obvious one would be Buddy Rich, who is a massive influence on Neil Peart. So when somebody that you admire and respect says, hey, you need to listen to this guy, or is clearly, I mean, Neil did a couple of albums, tribute albums to Buddy Rich. So it was clear that this was somebody worth listening to. And it was absolutely somebody worth listening to. Again, not the nicest of people sometimes, had a furious temper on the guy. But just as a drummer, just peerless. Gene Krupa was probably the closest. But just in terms of what he did, and in terms of it being pretty accessible stuff, you know, not being so conceited as to demand that his audience listened to these types of things, but by taking numbers like his version, or his band's version of the West Side Story overture, or Norwegian Wood by the Beatles. You know, he would take songs that people wanted to listen to anyway and then put his own stamp on them. So I think that level of, you know, lack of preaching about it, lack of you must listen to this type, lack of this is the only type worth taking seriously, and actually going right back to what we said about influences from other people and a little bit from here and a little bit from there is the way to do it, I think. So certainly him, a lot of other drummers cite Tony Williams as an influence. He's someone I don't know enough about, so that's going to be my next thing. When I was thinking about, who's influenced me, and then reading out, doing that deliberate thing, and who influenced them. So Tony Williams is somebody I've got to listen to. Other than that, it's all happened kind of organically, just from listening to bands and then going, who was that? And sometimes that's really annoying, because sometimes you'll hear a really good song and you'll go, I've got to find out who the drummer is for that. And I did that with Living for the City by Stevie Wonder, and listened to it, and I thought, there's some great drum breaks on this. I'm going to find out I'm going to look it up, who was the drummer on this, and it was bloody Stevie Wonder. And that's just really annoying that somebody can be that talented and that good a drummer. But, we are not worthy. The drummers I'm most listening to at the moment would be Sami Kawapamaki from Von Herzen Brothers, Vincent Barnevol from the French band Lazuli. Probably those. Oh, and I don't even know the guy's name. Right, so there's a new band from Birmingham called King Herd, who have released an album, and I saw them play at a festival, and I intend to see them again. They were really good. And I don't know their drummer's name, but he's really, and he was great fun to watch. And I went there with my brother, and I said, right, have a look at that drummer. You will not see anyone else have that much fun this weekend. He was really going for it. But other than that, it tends to be less, new drummers with new material, which is a bit of a shame, because there's no reason. I don't think the old days were always better, but it's kind of discovering people from a while back and thinking, so people you wouldn't necessarily think of, like Pete de Freitas from Echo and the Bunnymen, was a fantastic drummer, and just the little bits, or Gilson Lavis from Squeeze, people like that. So I guess it's people influenced by the John Bonhams, the Keith Moons, the Ringo Starrs, the Charlie Wattses even, that were then starting their professional career in the late 70s and early 80s, and it just rolls on. And now you have people listening to them and being influenced by them, and so you pass the torch. So the honest answer is anyone who interests me.